Imagine this scenario. You've built a serverless full stack application and things are going really well. You want to add a new feature or maybe update the existing one, but you don't have any data to understand your users. You are not aware about the usage pattern, nor you know which features your users love the most. To solve this, you can use Cloudflare Pipelines, a tool that allows you to ingest clickstream data or load telemetry from your workers without worrying about the underlying infrastructure. Hi, my name is Harshil Agrawal, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to use Cloudflare Pipelines in your application. For this demo, I have already created an e-commerce application. When a user clicks on any of these buttons, data gets ingested to the pipeline. For this example, we're going to send the following data: a timestamp, a session ID, user ID, some event data, and some device information. Now, some of this is dummy data. For your production application, you should use the production data. Also, to use pipeline, you need an R2 bucket. I have already created one for the demo. One of the great things about pipelines is that you decide how you want to ingest the data. It can be done through the server side or on the client side. In this video, I'm going to show you both the approaches. Let's start with the client side approach. To get started, you first need to create a new pipeline. You can use the command npx wrangler pipelines create to create a new pipeline. I'm going to pass on the pipeline name as clickstream video. And next, you need to pass on the R2 bucket name. I am going to use the bucket that I showed earlier. And lastly, for your production application, you should use the default compression since it will help you with reduced processing time and faster query performance. Once you execute the command, it will take you to the authorization screen where you need to give it the permission. This will allow the pipeline to ingest the data directly to your R2 bucket. Now that we have granted the required authorization, we should have a pipeline created for us. As you can see, we get an HTTP URL that can be used to ingest the data from the client side. Let's execute this curl command to test it out. Send the data to the pipeline, which will ingest the data to our R2 bucket. Over here, we get the success as true, which means that our data is now getting ingested to our R2 bucket. Let's check it out. I am gonna refresh the dashboard to view the newly ingested data. And over here, you can see that we have our data that got ingested through the pipeline. All right, now let's take a look at the code and implement this for our application. Now I am using worker static assets to serve my front end. The front end is written in HTML and I have some static product data coming in. Now again, for your production application, this data might be coming in from a database like D1. Once we load this data, we render it out using the render products function. We have our handler click function, which will make a call to our pipeline's URL whenever the button gets clicked. Let's go ahead and add the fetch function for this. In my try block, I'm going to make a post request to my pipeline URL, passing in the data that we created earlier. I'm also going to add a check to throw an error if it fails. Last thing, I'll copy this URL and replace it here. Now let's start the development server to see this in action. We have our application up and running on localhost 8787. I'm gonna open the console as well to see if we get any errors. I'm gonna make a request, and as you can see in the console, we are getting some error. This is the CORS error. This is expected. It tells me that no other application can call my pipeline. Only the website or the URL that I configure can make a call to my pipeline. To do that, you need to update the CORS settings for your pipeline. To update your CORS policy, you can use the command npx wrangler pipelines update and pass on the CORS origins flag. I'm going to pass on the pipeline name first. And now I am going to use the CORS origins flag and specify which URL should be able to make a call. Since I am running this on localhost 8787, I am going to configure it for this URL. Now that my pipeline is updated, let's run the application and test it again. I'm going to start the development server to test it out. It might take a couple of seconds for this policy to get updated. I'm going to refresh my page and test it out. As you can see, we don't get any errors in our console. This means that our CORS policies are now updated and this data is getting ingested to our pipeline. Let's go back to our R2 bucket and see this ingested data. I am going to hit refresh to view the new data. And over here, we have the newly ingested data coming in from our client-side application. All right, now let's deploy this application with npm run deploy. Our application is now deployed and we can access it at this URL. Going to open the developer tools and show you the logs. And we are going to test it now in production. So when I click on view details, I get an error. This was expected. As you know from earlier, we need to update the CORS policy to make this work for our newly deployed application. So I'm going to use the same command, but pass in the new URL. This is going to update our CORS policies, and we should be able to send the data from our deployed application. Let's refresh this, and I'll go to R2 and delete the existing data. I'm going to refresh this page and test it out. And now you can see we get no errors in our console. Well, we now have our clickstream data going into our R2 bucket. What we saw was ingesting data from the client side. Next, let's see how we can ingest this data from the server side using Cloudflare workers. For this, I am going to use a new pipeline and a new R2 bucket. I have already created the R2 bucket called binding pipelines. So let's create a new pipeline. Again, we are going to use the npx wrangler pipelines create command to create a new pipeline. This time, we're going to use the name clickstream binding video, and for the bucket, we're going to call it binding pipelines. This will take you again to this authentication page where you need to click on allow to allow your pipeline to access your R2 bucket. Now on your terminal, you will see that the pipeline gets created and we'll also see the bindings for the newly created pipeline. Since I am using workers, I will use pipelines workers API. To do that, you need to add the pipelines binding to your Wrangler file. For my application, I'm going to call it my pipeline. Next, in an HTML file, we need to update the fetch function. Instead of making a request directly to our pipeline, we will make a request to an endpoint /API /clickstream. In my HTML code, I have already updated this path. Now let's go to our worker code to add the required functionality. First, we will get the path name and the method. Then we'll check for the path name and the method. Next, we'll get the body from the request. Next, in our try and catch block, we will add the pipelines binding to send this data and then send a response OK to our end user. Let's save this. I'm going to start the development server and navigate to localhost 8787. This is where our application is running. and open up the developer console. I'm going to click on a couple of buttons over here, and as you can see, we get no errors in our console. If we go back to our terminal, we can see some requests getting logged in here. When you run this application locally, the data will not be sent to the production pipeline. You will need to deploy it to send the data to the pipeline. Let's go ahead and do that. We'll again use the command npm run deploy to deploy our application. The application gets deployed to this URL. We can check it out. I can click on the buttons over here, and this will send the data to our production pipeline. If we take a look at our R2 bucket, we should be able to see this newly ingested data. And here you have it. A serverless application using serverless data pipelines to ingest clickstream data. As a developer, you don't have to manage any underlying infrastructure. We take care of everything that you need. In fact, you can analyze this data with tools like MotherDuck. Simply connect your R2 bucket and run SQL queries. If you want to learn more, check out the tutorial that we have for you. You can find the link in the description below. There are a lot of things coming for pipelines. So stay tuned and see you in the next one.